So about 3 years ago, I dropped somebody off at Dulles Airport. They had a departing flight. Usually when you're dropping someone off at Dulles or Reagan or BWI, most airports, usually you'll have someone who's arriving at the airport and they're going to need a ride from the airport to their destination. And that's what this lady did. She made a request. I drove around the circle. I go down to the lower level and I pick up a passenger who was arriving. And when I picked her up, just said a brief hello, and I began to drive off the Dulles Airport compound. And as I did, I heard her make a brief phone call. I wasn't trying to listen in, but having been a hospital chaplain and having been in that role for many years of my life, here was her phone call. She said, "Hello, no, I just got to Dulles. No, now I'm in the Uber and I'm getting a ride. Yes, I know he's still in ICU. Yeah, I know he's still unconscious. Okay, I'll give you an update when I get one. I'll call you later. I love you. Bye." She hangs up the phone. I continue to drive, and just a moment later I said, "Ma'am, I wasn't trying to listen to your conversation, but as a hospital chaplain, I can tell you that every word I just heard from you tells me your heart must be broken." She said, "It is." I said, "Were you calling about a friend or family?" She said, "My fiance." Oh. I said, "Well, I'm very sorry to hear that, but I'm glad you got here so you can go visit your fiance." And she said, "Yeah, he's not in good shape. But I got a call last night from Virginia State Police, and they told me that my boyfriend had been in a really bad wreck, and I should try to get to the hospital as soon as possible." So that's what she did. That's how she landed from another state, and she wound up in my car. As I drove her to the hospital, we had a brief conversation. I don't remember exactly what I shared with her, but I'm always trying to give people words of encouragement, words of hope, and words that would give her some strength in her life. And as we got closer to the hospital, I said, "Would you be willing to give me your fiance's name? I know a lot of people who pray, and I call them prayer warriors. I'd like to pray for him and for you today, that God will give you strength and courage." She said, "I would like that." She wrote down his name, handed that to me, and we got to the hospital finally. And I pulled up to the front curb, and I said, "One more thing." I said, "Would you be willing to give me an update on how your fiance is doing later? If you're willing to do that, I'd like to get an update." She said, "Sure." So I gave her my contact information. She got out of the car and she walked into the hospital door, and I'll never forget, the door closes. She's inside. And before I could take off, I had already had another ride request in my Uber car from the hospital. So I waited just a moment. Next person comes out of the door, gets in the back seat of my car, and it was a man who was wearing medical scrubs. I figured this is either a doctor or a nurse. And I made a sort of small apology. I said, "Listen, I apologize. It took me a couple extra minutes. I was sort of dropping off a VIP that had to get to the ICU. And thank you for taking an extra moment and waiting for me." He said, "No problem. She's going to the ICU?" "Yeah." He said, "Well, I guess I know who you are." He said, "I am the head nurse in ICU. And we were hoping to make sure she got dropped off, so I'm so glad you got her here." And with that, I thanked him, drove him home, and then I drove about 10 hours with Uber that day. What happened from there was, got to be about 10 o'clock at night, and I went over to 7-Eleven and got a little Red Bull, just a drink with a little caffeine. I'm gonna have to drive home now. It had been a long day behind the wheel, and I bought a Red Bull. I pulled over at 7-Eleven, Started taking a couple sips. I don't drink those very often, but that night I did. And before I drove on the road to come back home, I'm going to check my phone and see if anyone has texted me or emailed me. Well, what do you know? I look at the email, the very first email I see is, "Dear Mark, thank you for getting me to the hospital this morning. I got to the ICU and I held my fiance's hand, and for 15 minutes I poured out my heart to him, and then he died." She said, "On our way over to the hospital this morning, I'll never forget that you wanted to, or you were willing to take his name, and you were going to be praying for him and me for the day. And it just didn't turn out to be the day I had hoped in my life. But I called my mom and I told her the conversation we had. And she said, we're a Muslim family. But when I told my mom about the ride over that you gave me, my mom and I both said, I wonder if you would invite him, if your Uber driver would come to the service tomorrow. So the next morning, the very thing I did was I showered, shaved, put on a tie, and I went to the mosque. A man I'd never met, but I wanted to do something that I thought would be encouraging to the fiance who ridden in my car that morning. And that's exactly what I did. I waited maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I barely knew what this lady looked like. But I do remember, and I'll never forget, how it unfolded in her life. So when I got there, waited 10 or 15 minutes, sure enough, young lady comes over, just put her arms around me and gave me a hug and said, I want to thank you for showing up and for being here. She said, I don't know you well, but I appreciated very much the words of encouragement that you had given to me. It gave me strength to make it through this day. She said, my life has changed now, but I was so grateful that you came. And people have asked me, why would you attend a service for someone you had never met? And I reminded them of the story by the African-American poet named Maya Angelou. And it's real easy to spell the word Maya. It's the month of May, but you add an A to the end of May and you get Maya. And her last name, Angelou, you spell the word angel and you add an OU to the end and you get Angelou. So I'll never forget Maya Angelou, or I'll never forget how you spell her name. But what I do remember, and I'll never forget, is what she once said. She said that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So why did I attend a service for someone I didn't know? And when I got there, she introduced me to this young man's father and brother and had a brief conversation. I gave them a hug. But it was that day that I learned that when you can help people and give them words of hope and encouragement so that they never forget what you said and they never forget how you made them feel, that's what I want to do in the life of other people. So that's a pretty simple approach to driving Uber. You always look for opportunities to bring words of encouragement and hope to them. And that particular day, that's what happened. I had a mom that taught me a lot about love. And she said, honey, that's the kind of thing you do because that's what love looks like. And that's what love does. So you think about love in your life. Use your life to make people feel embraced, to make them feel strengthened, to make them feel encouraged. I'll never forget the lady's name, which I won't share on my YouTube channel, but I'll never forget the story because of how it unfolded and maybe what a difference was made that day. I'm not perfect, but I have a heart that was created by a God who is perfect. And I hope that that little story right here on YouTube will embrace you, will encourage you, and will guide you to be a person who tomorrow morning when you get up, you're going to get up in a broken world, but you can also get up in perfect peace. That's the God we love. That's the God who loves us. And that's the God we serve. So make a difference tomorrow. Make God smile. Thanks for listening, Uber family. God bless you. Change the world.